our first online night as Guillemot. We've obviously had online events with Chain of Books before, but this is our first online event as Guillemot. And obviously, some technical issues may occur. Just a warning. This evening, we have the pleasure of listening to Derek Beaulieu, Rhys Farrell, and Lucy Burnett. First up, Derek and Rhys will be chatting about their book, Lens Flare, which we published earlier this month. Lens Flare is a collaboration between Derek and Rhys, based on the visual poetry published in Derek's Aperture sequence. These are concrete poems which create disintegrating logos and letter forms, which Rhys's work then amplifies by adding walls of colour. This is a process they'll no doubt talk about in just a second. So just to say a little about Derek and Rhys themselves before I hand over to them. Derek is the author of over 20 collections of poetry, prose and criticism. Derek has exhibited his visual work across Canada, the United States and Europe, and has won multiple local and national awards. And he is the Director of Literary Arts at Banff Centre for Arts and Creativity. He's also been a massive influence and inspiration to my own practice, and I'm really excited that we got to publish him on Guillemot and that he's here with us this evening. Rhys has completed a number of public art projects. He was the recipient of the 2019 Alumni Horizon Award from AU Arts, and his work plays particular attention to colour theory and how line and shape affect visual perception. And it's just such a beautiful book. I've got it. Oh, got it right here, and it's gorgeous. And I will hand over to Derek now so that he can show you more.
Thank you so much, Sarah. So I'm going to speak for a few minutes and then I'll hand it over to Rhys to talk as well. I thought I'd start by, well, a few thank yous. I'd like to welcome you all. While this is not the view behind me, this is where I live. I live in this green space right here on the side of Sulphur Mountain in Banff National Park. In Banff, Alberta, Canada. It's about 10 after 12 in the afternoon. It's sunny, but there's about 2 feet of snow on the ground. I'm going to read a little bit, a statement about how Lens Flare came to be, show a couple images, and then I'll hand it over to Rhys. So, it starts with a quote from Guillaume Apollinaire. And the quote is, "Accustom the eye to read a poem in a single glance, as an orchestra conductor reads the different ranks of notes in a score simultaneously, or as one sees the plastic and printed elements of a poster all at once." Process and surprise. Much of my writing is based on process, the act of working through what it means to write, the act of creating with specific media. And surprise, working without expectation of the final creation, allowing for the media itself to swerve me away from any goals I may have designed. I want writing to be in a conversation with my expectations, limitations, or the constraints I may have, the restrictions of media, and eventually with a community of readers and writers. As dry transfer lettering ages, it cracks and ripples, becoming less pliable. Letters no longer adhere to surfaces faithfully. They flake and crumble, crack, and fall off. These poems reflect that lack of cohesion. The letters crumble away from meaning, leaving rough traces of what could have been meant. In 2018, I created a sequence of visual poems which are made solely from the parts of letters, the tattered remains of what was still on mostly used sheets of letraset. An exploration of how much I could say, how captivated I could be with only the suggestions, the curves, the ascenders and bowls of letters long since used or flaked away. The resultant pieces were published in Simulacrum Press's edition, Fragmentum, in a small print run of 55 copies. In many different essays, I've suggested that concrete poetry should shine and shimmer like the street signs and broken neon of Las Vegas's Neon Museum, or the famous signs of Tokyo's nightlife, and yet mine didn't. They were black vinyl lettering on white pages. With Aperture, published by Penteract Press in 2018, I entered into a conversation with Anthony Etherin and Clara Denari, who listened to my desire to have these poems republished in day-glow, high-contrast colors, driving the conversation more and more towards those daydream streetscapes. The resultant book, published on glossy paper, began to push my thinking further into graphic design, seeing the compositional feel of the page as a place for color, foreground and background play, which surprised and enticed me. So those images, see if I can share screen here. This is the piece that was originally published by Simulacrum. Everyone can see that, yes? Black and white? Give me a thumbs up if somebody can see that.
Yeah, I can see it.
Excellent, thank you. And then it was recolored here as blue on pink by Anthony and Clara, which was then reworked again here. With Aperture's publication, I released these poems into a larger conversation, the conversation of readers and writers. Responses represent my own writing back to me in ways which surprise and inspire. I became a new reader of my own writing. It moves further and further away from my own intention into a multi-authored conversation suggesting shimmering stained glass windows. And now with Lens Flare, which is a page-by-page reply and response to Aperture, my friend and colleague Rhys Farrell has digitally responded to the disintegrating logos and letter forms, the crumbling vocabulary of suggestion and memory. Rhys is known for his large-scale panels of throbbing color, his huge murals which fill suburban malls and coat entire city blocks, and for his internationally acclaimed exhibitions. I invited Rhys to transform the pages of Aperture in any way he wished. What resulted were 1970s inflected landscapes of urban murals and playful geometrics. The poems have transformed from still lives of disintegrated neon into obscured logos in an op art scene awash with graffiti, immersed in a 1970s disco. I draw a lot of inspiration from Margaret Avison's dictum that the best response to a poem is another poem. And I welcome writers and readers to write back, to remix, to recreate, and respond. I can't imagine a better feeling than knowing that my writing has inspired someone else to create and explore as well, to feel welcome to be a writer themselves. To me, the role of the poet is not just to create work, it's to encourage the creation of other work. You're not the only one. You're supposed to fertilize the soil and not be the only one eating from the garden. If you have an extra crop, you give it away and you help other people metaphorically eat here. I love writing and I love poetry and I love publishing. And it seems to me that if I love it, I want other people to do it too. And I wanted to make it as easy as possible and be somebody who would encourage participation in communities and in writing. To me, the easiest way to do that is to get your work out there and not have any hang-ups. Just share. I can't imagine how generosity could not be sustainable in all of our practices. And I encourage that in younger writers, do that too. I think that the vast majority of poets I read and respect work in that way, one way or the other, either in the classroom or in publishing, or putting stuff up online, or dedicating themselves to a reading series, or hosting events, or the community service aspect of all of this writing. It's the best life, being able to share this. I want to thank you all for coming to this, and I hope that as Lens Flare starts making its way across the world, recognizing, of course, that the limitations of the postal system these days is holding some of us back, that you'll see this as a space for inspiration as well. You'll see this as a space to play and to invigorate, and you'll see this as something that you too can respond to and see as inspirational. Rhys, Do you want to add to the conversation? I've made you host so you can share images.
Cool. Hello, everyone. My name is Rhys. Thank you all for coming to the meeting. It's a lot of people, probably most people I've talked to in a while. So to start about lens flare, me and Derek were kind of working on, we kind of started making some collaborative work, and we were talking and we are just kind of sending images back and forth. And then we made a number of small collages and kind of just like, they were like doing fun stuff. And then Derek suggested that I respond to his aperture. And so he just sent me all of them. And then I kind of just started looking at them and working with them. So I want to kind of start with showing something. So one second. And then Derek, how did I go to the screen? Oh, screen share. Okay, perfect. So this is one of the first ones that we kind of made. And at first I didn't really have any like initial like story or narrative or like any like specific imagery in mind. I just wanted to add like my abstract elements and colors and kind of just complement Derek's letter form. So in the first ones, they had a very like abstract approach, and it was just kind of mixing our work together and seeing how it works. But then, so stop sharing this one. And then as the series moved on, like Derek said, how it kind of changed into like landforms and like kind of into like landscapes. Share screen. So then as we worked on them, they kind of turned into a different kind of story. And then they kind of started taking on landscapes and forms and like kind of just how the elements kind of turned into like working together instead of just mixing two kinds of, instead of mixing our work, they started cooperating. So like his letter forms kind of started turning into like rock formations, or even like a centerpiece that kind of reminded me of like a landscape feature. So then I started responding to that. And then, so kind of what I'm saying with this is like the series really transformed from like being abstract mix of two artists into kind of like a storyboard of like the elements working together. And then at the end of the story, I wanted to bring it back to a more kind of back to the abstractness to just show that it's not all about just the landscape. So then in here, so this is one of the final ones, and where you can see here, it kind of goes back to being just kind of like a mix or a clash of the styles. So I think this book was like a pretty good example of just kind of, it was just a very interesting collaboration because it went from stories to abstract to a combination of elements, and then kind of showing how our stuff is contrasting and complementing each other. And then, yeah, so I just kind of wanted to start off with showing you guys kind of the process and how they went from the beginning to the end with those three images. Yeah, Derek, do you want to, is there anything that you would want to talk about together, contribute on that?
Sure. Thank you for that, Rhys, and for sharing some of the images from the book itself. How was working on this process, now obviously other than scale, different than some of your larger, streetscapes and murals? And I've sent out a link for people to be able to have a look at your website. How was this process different than that?
Well, it's definitely a lot different because I'm a very material-based artist. I'm usually painting, or I'm usually like creating objects, or I'm in a studio. So for me to do all these collages on the computer with Photoshop was it was just a very different process, a lot cleaner. I wasn't getting messy, could kind of do it wherever I wanted. But it was actually kind of it was like painting, but very fast because you can like erase and go back and forth. So it was actually very fun for me because it was a lot quicker process. So I could kind of see different outcomes or change things as we worked. So even thinking about the process when me and Derek were making the book, if I remember correctly, I was kind of sending like 5 to 10 of them at a time, and we'd kind of chat about them and kind of see like, kind of just like agree or disagree on what was like kind of working or what was standing out. And then we'd kind of like, so it was a very like responsive project. Like we went back and forth throughout the process the whole time. So I think it really developed some really cool imagery, whereas we were putting both our ideas together rather than some collaborations where you just send someone your work, they do it, and then it's done. Whereas we kind of like, we pushed it back and forth so many times that I think it really contributed to the process of mixing the two works.
Thanks. I can now imagine that the next step for us in a project like this is to actually see them materialize on walls, to see these images now transfer into larger scale, walls and murals, and somehow move closer to your practice as well. With that, I'm happy to, if Rhys, if you want to hand the hosting duties back over to Sarah, I believe, or Luke, I'm not sure which.
Do you want to hand them over to Luke? That would be better.
You hand them over to Luke. Thank you again, everyone, for joining Rhys and I and Luke and Sarah and Lucy for the launch of Lensflare.
Well, thank you. That was really interesting. And I'm hoping that people might put some questions in the chat box or store them up for later, and just maybe we can go a bit deeper. But I'll introduce Lucy now. I'm delighted to introduce Lucy. Lucy's wonderful new sequence of poems, One Step Sideways and 13 Down, was recently released alongside Lensflare. I think it was last week. Was it last week? It feels like maybe it was 2 weeks ago now, although time is strange under COVID. The cover was designed by Antonia Glucksmann, and I think Antonia is with us this evening. Antonia also illustrated Maria Stagnica's Buried Gods Metal Prophets, which is out in February. And if you go to our events page, we also have a very wonderful event coming up with Maria and Susie Campbell, who's also here this evening. So yeah, back to Lucy. The text was devised from collaging crossword clues from the newspaper, and Ian Macmillan recently described it on Twitter as a splendid celebration of linguistic possibilities, which I think is rather wonderful, really. Lucy has 2 poetry collections, Leaf Graffiti and Tripping Over Clouds, both published by Carcanet Press, as well as a hybrid novel, Through the Weather Glass, published by Knives, Forks and Spoons. And I will hand it over now to Lucy. I think Luke will hand over the controls though.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sarah. I'm going to start with 3 quick thanks. So first of all, thanks to Luke, thanks to Sarah, thanks to Guillemot for organising this launch, and indeed for publishing my book. I also wanted to say a huge thanks to Antonia Glucksmann, who designed this fantastic front and back cover for the book. It's absolutely stunning. I couldn't be happier with it. It's actually the first time I've had a book cover designed for one of my books. I usually use one of my own photographs, and I've absolutely loved actually having the work of someone else in the front of this. So thank you, Antonia. And also thank you all for coming along. It is a shame not to see all of you in person, although I suppose there's the advantage that you are actually all able to be here. I suspect my nieces in New Zealand might not have quite made it in normal circumstances. I don't think they'd have quite thought poetry was quite worth the journey. Just a bit scandalous, I'm sure. But yeah, thank you all for coming along. And I'm thrilled to be reading us alongside Derek and Rhys this evening. So thank you for that, guys. That was really interesting. I'm going to start by reading the opening poem of the new collection. Then I'll talk a little bit about the process and say a bit more about how I kind of use the collage process. Then I'll read some more, and hey, it's a poetry reading. I think that's how it works. So I'll start with the first one, Airy Fairy. We begin with the impractical first battle of the Crimean War in September 1854, an event which is as capable of being disproved as the transformation of a tramp into a flower girl. Lower the church book and stare into the numerical datum rot of fathers of no effect but tax, and then retire to an area where you will find actors relaxing like mountain goats. Reincarnation is a Chinese unit of money that I like greatly. It leaves one space for maneuver in the measurement of atmospheric pressure. When I become unclothed, then I will aim to arouse a French Impressionist painter for a very long time. I will seek to be the offspring of a sow at one birth and to have a mild employer, but this is as likely as a thick paste used in Japanese cookery for soups, sauces, etc. In terms of the process as to how actually I went about writing these, as Sarah said, they were written through a collage of clues, actually from a book of crosswords. There's a book of quick crosswords from The Guardian. That's the original. You can see it's a bit, it's become a little bit trashed. At the time I was working at Leeds Beckett University, and my workload meant that I wasn't having a huge amount of time for, or headspace for, writing poetry, but I did seem to have time for crossword puzzles and a pint before dinner with my then partner while staying with her down in Shropshire, priorities and all that. And one day when I was down there visiting, and I was out at work, I noticed the crossword book still out on the side where we'd left it, having come back from the pub. And I decided to see what would happen if, rather than actually setting about answering the clues, like maybe is normal with a crossword, what would happen if actually I started collaging the clues. It was a fairly strict process. So I took all the across clues in order, and then I moved on to the down clues, allowing myself only conjunctions and linking phrases. So you get this effect of these prose poems where, so they're all kind of, I don't know if you can see there, square prose poems on the page. This effect is though perhaps it seems like it makes sense, but perhaps it doesn't really. In order to show you that in practice, what I've done actually is I've found the original crosswords, which I based some of the poems on. So I've got the next 4 poems, which I'm going to share. If I can make this work. So the next 4 poems I'm going to read. I'm going to, sorry, I'll close that one. I'm going to put the, can you see that? I'm going to put the actual clues up on the screen before you, so you can actually see how actually I've linked them together. So we'll start with the first one, which is called Trespass. And so we encroach, like predatory gullbirds, implied agricultures, labourers of old. I have done many exercises to strengthen and enlarge my muscles, but still so much sideways drift at sea. We are a people, habitually pretending to be something we are not. Our loving is a huge kind of pasta, and soapy froth is normal. Should I carry a gun? I contain theft of property below a certain value in the dividing partition between my nostrils. I dress in cloth used especially for army uniforms, and you are half airplane and half helicopter. You dream of Goa, but your actual life is more accurately comprised of biros and old shabby cinemas. If you're a country, you'd be European and your capital would live in Tallinn. Having you taken this in, it's been noted. I go in advance of others. Biff, punch me. My name is Spence. Behind the grill, you will find some people eating neither animal nor dairy products. There are a vast multitude of them with sharp claws. I am a very uncommon corsair, glued to my very own piece of wood, and this is the unit of geological time most aptly compared to Japanese flower arranging, proving superior in quantity or quality to carbonated water. I'm an important person. a natural talent, a tabloid pin-up, but polite, deep red. I have sisters. Imagine me as an Iceman attending a horsey sports meeting in the Libyan capital. My words are alternately distributed, improvised or impromptu. By the time we reach the 43rd American state, it will have turned to seaweed. I'm going to stop sharing that one. I'm going to give you another two if I can get the right ones. No, it's just on the same one again. No. I think I've closed the other poems, the other images. Sorry about that. I'll maybe come back to that at the end. Sorry about that. In terms of the poems themselves, that gives you an idea of how it goes. I'll try and maybe open the other poems at the end to give you an example of how that's working. One of the interesting effects as I wrote, which I hadn't expected, was how something of a strange political commentaries began to emerge between the kind of gaps between the poems. Some of this, I suppose, was a result of the context in which they're being read as opposed to actually being written. So the poem Disappear, as I'm about to read, probably wouldn't have sounded political at all until early 2020. And the opening lines of it perhaps sound a little bit like wishful thinking, which you'll hear when I get started. But perhaps it was actually also inevitable that they'd start to sound political by dint of what's actually put into quick crosswords, such as the references to Gaza in the second poem I'm going to read. And thirdly, there's also an extent to which my own political ideas and thoughts seem to somehow find expression despite and through what is a fairly strict process. I'm going to read you 4 poems which give you a sense of this before I will move on and just read several more at the end, again through a process of chance. So the first poem I'm going to read is called Disappear. I dare you to disappear as quickly as a child's card game or the widespread outbreak of a disease. Your remains are but a decayed, sweet-flavoured liquid that is reputed to cure all ills, and fond memories of chases involving small pleasure craft powered by foot. Oh, those maritime days. These days, the main challenge is fitting all the players on the pitch, complicated. The arguments have retired to the inn, where we join together for food, which is overwhelmingly not liked. It was bought with money voted by Parliament for the use of the current monarch. In conclusion, I'd like to point out that accompanying you to events is a bit like making a royal dwelling from the mere contents of a fuel container. Gaza practice. The GP works in a Palestinian city, utilising the disguise of a radical English writer and supporter of the American and French revolutions. He is not listened to. He is provided with a restraining garment and a place to live in a cave from where he watches the soldiers dropping into battle to the musical accompaniment of religious texts. He'd once been lax with confidence as an American painter with a loving mother. What had broken his camel's back was his surprise at having been taken like this. A mathematical sum cannot calculate hair loss. It's more of a confused movement than that, involving potassium carbonate, learning, and a suggestive look or grin. Immortal dressings. In good health and putting on clothes suitable for a tall and thin person blessed with perpetual life. I am the embodiment of US finance stroke melting snow. My secret is the extent of my extreme tiredness and a reckless and impetuous quality. I might share it with an unwanted garden plant. If I am the baby's father, then I am so impaired. I am the embodiment of the US frontier. I like cross-country skiing and people who use words like depository and who know the 9th letter of the Greek alphabet. I'm an old international monetary system. I smother and I kill large numbers. See once more the brutality of old money. I'm a Pacific island alone. And the last one for this section, electioneered. I've worked actively for the deep, prolonged unconsciousness of a political activist who was as fatherly as Noah's grandfather, who lived 969 years, which is even longer than an extended drinking session. Currently, I'm looking for an overall view as to whether the plants with sword-shaped leaves, tall stalks and brightly coloured flowers have been listening in on me the whole time. You'd think they had nothing else to do. Even buses and trains spy on my mother. These are things to do with birth and many other things. I am composed of baked clay, back lanes and ardent love, only one in the instalment of a series, and you are a swaggering show of courage and a burn caused by hot liquid and more than anything, an intelligent arboreal ape, when all I had really wanted was a sparkling Spanish wine. Of course, it would be totally wrong to describe these as political poetry. They're not. They are an exploration of how I much prefer questions to answers. But most of all, I really enjoyed, they became really addictive to write actually. And they're an expression of my love of wordplay and of that possibility actually offered up by chance processes. I know there are quite a few friends here on here tonight who maybe aren't especially experienced in poetry, and the only bit of advice I can say in terms of reading them is not to think too hard about them, and just to actually inhabit the little worlds which they offer up, and to accept them as they are. I'm going to finish with a few poems which I'm just going to flick through the collection and see what poems are crying out to be read. Because it was written through a process really in terms of chance, I want to finish that in how I want to replicate that in the last few poems which I read. But I'll finish with the final poem, which contains as much of a conclusion perhaps as a collection of this type can offer. So in the meantime, welcome to my little world. I'm glad to have you here with me. To dismantle. You take the small pond of standing water more as a result of idleness. Sorry, you take apart the small pond of standing water more as a result of idleness than the pursuit of comfort. It soon becomes coated with oxide and before too long transforms itself into the smouldering remains of a fire. This is the level hinterland, laying itself before you like a cut of meat, including part of a rib. I presume you are self-employed, but I may be wrong about this. You're able to read and write. You can drink. You cannot just provide an oversupply of advice through ruthless self-interest, but you can, and you do. You resemble the main valve controlling the flow of liquid through a pipe. Are you honestly surprised by your black eye? Your stripes are coloured and changeable. You lack only for hearing organs. Poltergeist. A ghost who is creating disorder among the plants of the popular rock garden chants, I air butte, as if it's entirely normal to talk in anagrams containing even less purpose than Japanese poems. But it is breakfast time, and I've learned that the proper porridge ingredient is directional control as the required evidence of something hitting water. You then add soft Italian cheese and loud, harsh-sounding rock music to make it more than damp. What's this? An internal flight, a sender of signals? We pay our honour in items of regalia passed into law in the form of updated reproduction equipment. If you need replacement components, you must apply to G.K. Chesterton's detective and request a cultivator of a piece of land. It's a sign. I met the prof, he told me so. Of incendiary liquids, boxing champions, beer. I'll do 3 more. Cheese souffle. The egg dish sees lush coffee as a provider of racing certainties. A case of making the sudden quick movements more commonly associated with violent young criminals. We've got too full as wide open spaces of water. We have the courage of an absolutely level finish, which proves to be as sexually suggestive as old anaesthetic. The air supports the passage of radio waves sufficiently to bother the equally experienced and qualified sea captain and his pet animal. You can embrace your wife as strongly as a cause. Grouping things according to kind. The rivets are the less fancied contestants, once tame and now wild. We are not here. We are in a fjord and city of Norway, which proves insignificant as an Islamic militia or a small chicken, controversial. Only Australia or England can win. Ice crystals on glass, sense organs. This next one actually was the one Ian McMillan liked. Choppy, and of the sea, a bit rough, like Myanmar. Like a dead novelist in 1950 seeking out a Suffolk river on the Lone Ranger's horse. Imagine a tablet. Imagine a painted scenery hung on stage and tell me what you see. Words can be deceptive. They shift, rotate, egg on. Life is a kind of beard, a kind of duck, and a kind of fanatic all at once. Life coincides only partly with the bullfight. In a Florida resort, the world encounters the edge of disaster, like a daydream, sudden, fizzy, humourless, and even disapproving. A cry of disapproval by an obsolete brass instrument is heard repenting. Fire up, my friends, fire up. Our instrument is an anagram of Indian string. I'll finish with hypochondriac. A valetudinarian cooking utensil tries out an elementary swimming stroke and rebounds. Fearless and daring. Cows, etc. show respect towards her. We are amidst a sudden attack on the Maltese capital, and the weather is just right for paddling. We are in need of a unit of electrical resistance. We require a person with similar views, overactive, terrified, additions to an existing will involving wild excesses of drinking and sex. Yes, we are numb. We are suitable for both house and garden, English cheeses, sweets on a stick. Where? Where saloons can be left empty. We have got this far and no further. So to conclude, the uninteresting last part has been let in. It is our successor. Thank you. I'm going to try now hand the hosting back to Luke.
Thank you very much, Lucy. I'm sure it will arrive in just a second. I'm also going to post up a link to your book on our website now, so you can go and have a look there. There we go. Hopefully that's showing. So thank you very much, Lucy, Derek, and Rhys. That was really lovely to hear you both. I did wonder how Derek and Rhys might sort of read or approach talking about the book. A couple of things I wanted to show Derek's and Rhys's book 2, because I think some of the colored images didn't show up on the share screen thing. And Derek, the post being what it is, it hasn't crossed the Atlantic yet. So Derek and Rhys, I don't think they've got the images, but they've got their books yet, but they are really brilliant, bright. We designed the book quite oversized to sort of really emphasize and really make those colors and those really make those colors stand out and they're extraordinarily striking text and images. And yes, and we've got obviously Lucy's lovely little book, which also the design, we thought immediately of the Square book, that we've started doing a few more of these small Square titles. Antonia came up with some really interesting and difficult to source paper choices, which is standard working with Antonia on the design of books. And she's come up with this, but it's come out really, really well. We're really pleased when they open the boxes to these. The books they feel really nice and they look really good. So we're pleased with all of these. We've got some lots of really interesting design books. I saw we've got J.R. Carpenter in the room too, who is another person who Antonia worked on designing books and also made very difficult to produce, which was wonderful. So yeah, thank you all very much for coming. Thank you for reading. If you have any questions, I'm just seeing some bits popping up in the chat. If you have any questions, drop them in the chat and we can ask them now. Well, there's one. Can you ask Lucy how she chose her titles?
Yeah, they were the answers to the first clue in the poem. So for example, with hypochondriac, the last one which I read there, the clue will have been that's actually a really bad example. So Biff, the clue is to be punched. So yeah, so I use the answer to the first line in the poem or the clue as the title.
I actually never thought to ask that question. Feels like an obvious one now. Thank you. If there are any other questions, please do pop them in the chat. But I don't think we've got any more. Just scrolling up quickly to see if we've got much. Oh, 2 questions from Gemma. First, what do you think is the role of the compiler in your poems? Are you reflecting some sort of hidden theme or subconscious? Can you see that one, Lucy? That one you read.
Yeah, it's kind of trying to. It's a really interesting one. It's sort of submerging the compiler. I'm like a vessel through which this kind of meaning emerges, which is kind of hidden within the poem. So the role of the compiler is almost to be invisible, really, to kind of fade into the background and to be a way in which other meanings might emerge by kind of linking these things together. So yes, if a poem, if a crossword, if the clues to a crossword have a subconscious, maybe that is something which I'm helping out into the world. I've never actually met anyone who's compiled a crossword. I'd love to, because actually you did start to find kind of themes actually through a crossword. So I did feel like there was actually a kind of meaning or a mood or something actually within the clues, as it were. So hopefully I've been able to bring that subconscious of the crossword to life.
You mentioned you haven't met anyone who compiles crosswords. We actually had an email about your book the other day saying that it's been sent on to someone who does do that for one of the major newspapers as well. So I haven't heard the response yet. We'll see what that that comes back. There's a question here for Derek and Rhys as well. Derek and Rhys, if the next step is to move out, to move work onto walls, etc., are there particular sites you'd want to use or avoid?
Rhys, how about you can tackle that?
For those specific works, transforming them to a larger space, I don't think there's definitely some spaces I'd probably want to avoid, just like material wise, like probably like a really bumpy wall, because like the work is very flat in like graphic design. But as for like particular sites, I don't think I I don't think I'd want to put a parameter on anything just yet, just because we haven't even made one. So I think it would be good to just experiment and see what happens.
Yeah, I agree. I you know, there's something to be said about large, more public spaces, so you get that interaction, but also with, you know, smaller, more private spaces that might be down an alley or a close, or in a post-industrial building where you would happen upon these interpretations unexpectedly. So, I mean, we don't have plans, but who knows where this conversation will take us.
Is it, Derek, is that medium something you've worked before? Sorry, have you projected onto buildings or painted onto buildings?
I've had work projected through high quality digital projections on the side of concrete buildings, and on films projected as well. I have I'm the only Canadian poet to have a piece of public art in the UK, which is housed on the grounds of Roehampton University, bolted to the wall of the English department building, which is about 8 feet by 8 feet square. Rhys, on the other hand, you have your work prominently displayed publicly, right?
Yeah, I have a lot of work in Calgary where I live, but then I also got the opportunity in 2018 to go to I did a mural in Spain in the city of Rota, and then I also did a mural in Sicily in the city of Graniti. So those are really cool trips, and they're obviously international. So it was very nice to kind of go and do public art in a different place rather than where I'm familiar with. But yeah, I've been working on public art for quite a few years now, so the portfolio is building.
Thanks, Rhys. I think we've got a couple more questions coming in. We got one from Gemma, which was for Lucy, second of two. Okay, Gemma, so we've got another question for Lucy, which is, I wonder if you think order and chaos. Gemma's testing you tonight, Lucy. I wonder if you think order and chaos are competing in your poems. Did you find yourself seeking order, or are we as readers seeking order where perhaps there is none?
Yeah, no, I found a picture of Gemma and sitting there with her partner Ben, and I blame Ben for the questions actually. I think it's a different type of order. I think we're used to things, an understanding of what is order and what is reality, and this is just, it's a different type of order. It's a different world. So I don't think it's any more or any less chaotic than what we inhabit. It's just different vision on the world and a different way of putting things together. So it's equally as ordered and equally as chaotic as what we think is normal.
Derek, we've also had quite a big question coming to you, which is, I don't know if how you fancy tackling this one, which is, I liked what Derek said about wanting to share and open up possibilities of writing, but how does an erased letter, as distinct from an erased phrase in a text, work as poetry? Seems quite a big question.
I don't know that it's necessarily different. I think that the form of, poetry as a form, to me, is about the engagement with the various particles of language and communication. So whether that be this, the paragraph or the sentence or the phrase or the stanza, all the way down to, the letter or the punctuation mark. There are many prominent examples of the last 100 years of poems that are a single letter or a manipulated single letter. So to me, these pieces are part of that continuum and part of working with what is the threshold of poetry. And that to me is the exciting job of the poet and of readers, is to explore our own personal thresholds, but what can the medium, what can poetry withstand? Like how what can we do with this form? How far can we push it? And what are the limitations of our own thinking? So poems that are, the rubble of a single letter, two sculpted legs in the desert. I think that this is the material poetry. This is how we see it. And we encounter this walking down the street. You know, walking down any street, you'll see street signs and former shop fronts with lettering that has fallen apart, that has, you know, degraded, and there's a beauty in the linguistic possibility of that rubble.
Thanks, Derek. We've got, so I want to wrap it up around 8, but so we've got two more little questions for Lucy, I think. One is, hi Lucy, Ollie here. At what point did you start shifting the pronouns, which feels like where your voice really comes in?
I'm interested to know whether that's when I shifted from the, so there's lots of different pronouns in there. There's some of them are I, some of them are you, some of them are he and she. Ollie, are you able to say when you thought it was the voice came in? So was it when I shifted into the first person? Was it when I shifted out of it?
Just when we could see the clues, and I could see when you had added or shifted a pronoun to accord with an earlier pronoun, felt like it it really shifted the tone of the poem, which are brilliant, by the way.
Ah, thank you. I love this. There's Ollie's in France at the moment. We've got Derek in Canada. We've got my relatives in New Zealand. Got friends from Ireland. It's lovely. It was totally instinctual, Ollie. I can't say. I know that I didn't want it all to be in the first person, the second person, or I was deliberately shit. So, but they were all actually written really quickly, and I don't know whether I can give you an intelligent answer other than I went with my instinct on that one. Yeah.
Thanks. I think I quite like this last question, so we'll make this one the last one from Kathy, which is, do you plan to take the obvious next step onto the cryptic crosswords?
I've actually done so in my last collection. I almost read it tonight. I actually did that was the first time I did it. So in Tripping Over Clouds, there actually is a cryptic poem from cryptic crosswords using the same process, and either it doesn't work as well because already there's almost like too much meaning or crypticness in there, or I wasn't as relaxed with the process, but I actually don't think it's quite as successful, but maybe I need to keep on trying and see what happens. They certainly become a lot more dense and complex, but maybe it's something for me to practice. And obviously I didn't just criticize one of my poems. All my poems are brilliant, clearly, but no, yeah, I'm not convinced that using cryptic poems will be more successful, but yes, Kathy, I'll give it another go.
Thank you, and I completely agree with what you're saying. Like, it's amazing, isn't it, to see so many people from all over the world in here at once. That's one of the maybe a few sort of benefits of coronavirus has introduced us to this technology and made us get used to it. Forced our hand in this one. So again, we'll wrap it up there. I just want to say thank you again very much to all of our readers, to Lucy Burnett, Rhys, Farrell, and Derek Beaulieu. Sarah's somewhere in the background too. So thank you for introducing. Thank you everybody for coming. It's really lovely to see you all, and I've seen some nice chats and conversations going on, which has been amazing. Thank you very much. If you want to have a look at the books, do go along to the Guillemot Press website. You'll also see the other events there if you're interested. Just have a look through. They will be being updated and added to over the coming weeks. I've already had a few people contacting me to say they want to be added to the newsletter list, so keep those emails coming and I'll add you this evening. Thank you all very much, and hopefully see you at the next event.